Within the history of American music, he's an obvious individual to teach.
He clearly is our most famous favorite son.
The thing you have to understand is he was born in 1792, which was shortly after the American Revolution, so there wasn't an artistic or an arts identity for America yet. Music is very important in education, particularly for children who maybe don't have the advantages that some others do, and access to instruments that they wouldn't have at home, the ability to sit down at an instrument in school and learn that they do have aptitude, and have someone at the school encourage the parents to do what they can to help that child take advantage of musical education.
But there's some very intriguing questions about what is going on in American society at that time, and Lowell Mason's attempt to reform a tradition that has parallels even today with how people view music, what's good music or what's proper music, or how do we worship, or all of these issues that are perhaps eternal questions or recurring questions, and just seeing how they're answering it and what's going on at that time versus contemporary times.
He begins to think, music is just so important. And he goes to the Boston schools and he says, this really is something that should be in the schools, that kids should be able to learn music, which was unheard of before this time.
When Lowell in the 1830s was trying to get the politicians in Boston and the other key influencers to understand the value of music in the school system and having children be in choirs.
Music was never part of the curriculum of any school system. And they're saying, well, I don't know, this is, we're not quite sure of this. He said, okay, I'll be willing to teach in Boston for the first year for nothing if you let me attempt this. So the price was right, and the Boston school said, okay, and he began teaching music in the Boston public schools, and it was such a success.
And how the children really enjoyed it, and then I think also the performances that he put on, which were the first large choral performances of many works, they came around and saw that it belonged in the program. But it is interesting today, when arts are always, as long as I've been alive, periods of come and go where they're being cut, or are we cutting sports, are we cutting arts, or what are we going to cut? The arts do tend to get cut to some degree.
And when you look at it today, you just take it for granted that, music is part of our schools. And any kid in America who takes music, whether it's in the elementary, high school, or college level, today can thank Lowell Mason for that. And that just takes off. And different system after different systems follows with music. So clearly that's why he gets the nickname of the father of American school music. But almost none of this would have happened if it wasn't for a friend of his by the name of Moses White. And when they're 14 years old, they were down by the Charles River, and they were kind of wading in the water. Lowell Mason actually slips, and he falls into the middle of the Charles River, slips on into about 7 or 8 feet of water. And he's gulping, he's screaming, his lungs fill with water. He goes down, he comes up a second time, he goes down. Finally, the third time, he goes down to the bottom of the river. And this Moses White dives in, clothes and all, and is able to pull Lowell Mason off the bottom of the Charles River. The other friend, Joseph Lovell, he pushes out this big log, and they're able to get Mason out and eventually get the water out of his lungs and bring him back home. So if it wasn't, I always say, if it wasn't for this Moses White, no one would have ever heard of Lowell Mason.
Earn a living in music isn't something many people do, so he set off to be a banker in Georgia, and pursued his love of music and brought some choirs together down there. Came upon some books from Europe which really influenced his education about what was going on in music, and then he moved back to Boston and published a collection of hymns, not under his own name, but under the Handel and Haydn Society name in Boston.
And he continues to write songs that probably the most famous, Nearer My God to Thee. He does the arrangement for Joy to the World. We know Mary Had a Little Lamb. He helps with the arrangement of the music of America, My Country 'Tis of Thee, which is first played at the Arlington Street Church in Boston. And Lowell Mason brings in 500 school children that sing that song, and that is the first time in history that children got together and actually sang a song. It was conducted by Lowell Mason.
It got you ready for pushing yourself, and particularly in performance, you're in charge. You either do it or you don't do it. Nobody is going to force your fingers to move. So there are a lot of sort of very basic character traits that can be fostered or developed, I think, just through the performance aspect of music.
I learned a lot about the house through the Lowell Mason Foundation, and it was really fascinating when they brought in the specialists from England and identified some of the timbers as being, dating back to the 17th century. And of course, Medfield has the unfortunate but wonderful history of King Philip's War and the Medfield Massacre, and you start wondering, where did this piece of wood come from, or these timbers? And so the house itself clearly was in bad disrepair.
Anyone that's into music, he is the foundation of that. And to think he's the founder of all this, and we have his home, it's going to be torn down. And a whole grassroots effort begins here in Medfield. And once the music community outside of Medfield heard of that, they too come in and were very, very supportive.
Now we're talking, can we do it as a museum? What is it that we can do with this structure? And of course then Lowell Mason comes into play, that he was born there and he's a very famous man, and so it just made total sense to save the house. The house is not on its foundation yet. We are still up on some I-beams, and why that is because we were a little bit stalled financially, and that we had to get a little more funds behind us to make it possible for us to do the next phase.
But it was interesting because later studies and tests in that house show that some of the beams and timbers in that house actually go back to the 1600s. And we were kind of baffled by that.
They started seeing gunstock beams in the upstairs, and the attic was the mother lode. I mean, it is loaded with history up there, and it's very visible. So there was one beam that I saw that had axe marks on it from being hewn by a broad axe. And a broad axe is what basically they built almost all the houses with. Seeing those marks, I knew that was a very old piece of wood. But then I started seeing these marriage marks. This one happened to be the Roman numerals, where they count the joinery and how it's going to go together. And so you'll see, Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, and the order that it's going to go together. You look down on the floor, and one of the joints was a half dovetail, which you hardly ever see. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is really old. I'm really excited about this because I'm so entertained with the mystery of unfolding the history of a structure.
It's tremendous value. It's historical value. It's value to the music community. This is just something so special. It's a Paul Revere house. It's a old Ironsides. It's part of our heritage, our history that we can pass on to our kids.
It was great what the town did. Really just wonderful, filming the move and the publicity that was generated and the effort to save the house. So the people of Medfield really need to be commended for caring about history and paying attention to it so it's not completely lost. What I think is important about Lowell Mason and other people like Lowell Mason is their generosity of spirit. I mean, he seems like he was a very generous human being who was passionate about the arts and wanted to share. And he had a son, William, who became a very well-known pianist. And William was known for helping many young students establish their careers, and they became the first generation of American composers. So that mentoring, that willingness to help the next generation do new things and carry forward, I think was really a key part of what I took away from Lowell and take away from Lowell, because he was ahead of his time. And we have many things today that are ahead of our time, which are difficult for people to understand, but just being open-minded and realizing that the next wave is coming is important, and to support